Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Thomas held tightly onto that box filled with old photographs, travel clippings, yellowed movie tickets, and love notes that had been stored away for decades at the back of the main bedroom drawer. Each item he placed into the boxes seemed to carry a piece of his own story. That summer house in Connecticut, which witnessed so many moments of the family, was now being emptied out. Claire carefully folded some sheets, the same ones they used during summers when the grandchildren ran through the backyard, and took a deep breath, trying to contain a mix of anxiety, sadness, and even a bit of relief. They decided to sell everything. The house, the furniture, the physical memories of that place that, for years, had been their family refuge. The decision wasn't easy, but it made sense. Age was beginning to weigh on them, health issues demanded more attention, and practically speaking, maintaining a house that size so far from urban centers no longer made much sense. Both knew San Diego would be a fresh start. A place where they could live more comfortably, have easier access to medical services, and enjoy a simpler life. It was a sunny city with pleasant weather and a community full of people in the same age group, promising a calmer old age. The boxes were stacked one by one into the moving truck. The furniture, carefully wrapped in bubble wrap, slowly disappeared from the living room, bedroom, and kitchen. The sound of footsteps echoed differently inside that nearly empty house. Even the smell seemed to change, as if the environment itself understood that this chapter was coming to an end. The only thing that would remain there was the old family car, kept in the garage of the lakeside cabin. It would be available for the kids, should they ever decide to visit. As she organized the final details, Claire held onto a photo frame for several seconds. It was a picture from a long ago summer. They, much younger, hugging each other, with their 3 children still small, smiling, holding colorful balloons. She pressed the frame against her chest, closed her eyes, and felt a sharp pain in her heart. That place wasn't just wood, bricks, and furniture. It was the stage where they built an entire life, where they faced challenges, celebrated victories, and hid from ghosts they never had the courage to face head-on. Thomas approached, grabbed another box, and without saying a word, looked at Claire. His eyes carried a mix of complicity, fatigue, and yet, a certain sense of relief. They both knew, without having to say it aloud, that this move represented much more than a simple address change. It was, in fact, the closing of an era. Something within them was also being packed up, stored away, locked tight, perhaps forever. By the end of the afternoon, with almost everything organized, they walked to the lakeside cabin. That was their favorite spot. They had spent countless evenings there watching the kids fish, the grandchildren play in the water, and planning trips and dreams that, in some cases, never left the paper they were written on. They sat side by side on the small porch, in silence. There wasn't much to say at that moment. Both knew exactly what the other was feeling. Claire stared fixedly at the water, gently squeezed Thomas's hand, and took a deep breath. He noticed the gesture, turned his face toward her, and for a few seconds, their eyes met in a way that hadn't happened in a very long time. It was a look full of stories, of closeness, but also loaded with unspoken things. Words that had been hidden away for years, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of convenience, perhaps out of love. There, on that porch, while the water softly hit the stones along the shore and the sound of crickets filled the air around them, something different began to emerge. It wasn't exactly sadness, nor joy, nor regret. It was more like clarity. An almost uncomfortable awareness that yes, they were ending a cycle. And maybe this was the right moment, finally, to open up to each other. Thomas broke the silence, still looking at the horizon, and remarked, in a tone mixing nostalgia and acceptance, that everything was ready. The items were already in storage, the truck would leave early the next morning, and officially, they would leave behind that place that had been so much more than just a house. Claire nodded silently, but remained quiet. She knew he was right, but inside her, something stirred, as if this was the last chance to resolve what had been left hanging. And though she had convinced herself for years that it was better to keep certain truths hidden, now she realized it wouldn't make sense to start a new life carrying ghosts in her luggage. Thomas noticed. He knew that look of Claire's. He knew something was about to be said. Maybe, deep down, he even expected it. After all, that goodbye wasn't just from walls, the lake, or the furniture. It was, above all, a farewell to who they pretended to be for so many years. And as scary as that seemed, it was also liberating. Claire clenched her fingers together, as if that gesture alone could calm the storm taking over her chest. The silence between her and Thomas seemed heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was as if, after decades together, they had developed a form of communication that didn't need words. But in that moment, words would be inevitable. She knew this. As much as she tried to bury that secret for years, she knew this would be the last possible moment to speak. And deep down, she understood that if she didn't talk now, she would carry it forever. She took a deep breath, looked at the lake, looked away, then tried to face Thomas, but her voice simply froze. The knot in her throat seemed to prevent any sound from escaping. It took a few seconds before she managed to force her vocal cords to work. And when she did, what came out was a voice almost unrecognizable, softer, more fragile, completely different from the woman who had always been so firm, so sure of herself. "Thomas," she said hesitantly, tears forming in her eyes. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a very, very long time ago, but I never knew how." He stayed silent, staring directly at her, showing neither surprise nor urgency. Just waiting. Claire noticed that, and for some reason, that posture made her hands tremble even more. She took another deep breath, as if drawing strength from the air entering her lungs. I made a mistake," she let out, allowing the words to slip out as if each weighed a ton. "A mistake that still shames me today." She swallowed hard, closed her eyes tightly, trying to hold back the tears, and then blurted it all out at once, like ripping off a bandage. "Carla. Carla isn't your biological daughter." The silence that followed was so absolute that it seemed even the sound of the water had disappeared. Claire couldn't bring herself to look at Thomas. She kept her eyes fixed on her own hands, now resting on her lap, gripping herself so tightly it seemed like she wanted to disappear inside herself. She knew this would be shocking. That secret had been locked inside her for decades, since that summer when, out of weakness, vulnerability, or simply desire, she got involved with Daniel Whitmore, the neighbor, someone who shared the same circle of friends, attended the same barbecues, dinners, and trips. It started seemingly innocently. Conversations that lasted longer than they should, laughs that went beyond what was acceptable, glances that lingered too long. Until one day, when the line between friendship and something more became too thin, she crossed a limit she swore she'd never break. At first, she thought it would be just a single mistake. A slip-up that could be forgotten. Something she could pretend never happened and bury forever. But things didn't go that way. A few weeks later, she realized she was pregnant. And although her heart screamed the truth, she chose to hold on to the hope that maybe it was Thomas's. But deep down, she knew. Always knew. From the first ultrasound, from the first kicks in her belly, from the first time she looked at that baby born so similar to Daniel. With every birthday, every party, every family event, that weight was there. Present. Silent. Always. Claire began to cry, unable to hold back anymore. Her voice now broken by sobs. I regret it so much, Thomas. So many times I wanted to tell you. So many times I tried. But I was afraid. Afraid of destroying everything we built. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of what this would do to our children. She breathed unevenly, wiping her tears with her hands, but as soon as she tried to compose herself, more sobs came. And I swear to God, I always loved you. It was never a lack of love. It was weakness. I felt lonely, lost, you were distant, traveling so much back then, too busy, and I was weak. Claire pressed her hands against her face, as if wanting to disappear. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I swear I'm not. I'm telling you because we're closing a chapter, and I can't carry this anymore. For a few seconds, she heard no response. His silence felt worse than any scream. Then, she gathered courage to face Thomas, expecting to find shock, outrage, pain, anger on his face. But what she saw was something she could never have imagined. Thomas was motionless, yes, but without any expression of surprise. No tears, no wide eyes, no fury she so feared. Just a calm, almost serene gaze that left her more confused than anything. He looked away from her, stared at the lake for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and then, with a calmness that seemed impossible under the circumstances, said, "Claire. I know." The ground seemed to vanish beneath her feet. Her whole body went cold, her mouth dried instantly, and for a few seconds she thought she must have misheard. How do you mean, you know?" she stammered, barely able to articulate the words. Thomas took another deep breath, tightened his hands on his knees, and responded, with a firm voice, "I found out a long time ago. Longer than you imagine. I did a DNA test. As much as I tried to convince myself it was just in my head, eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore." Claire brought her hands to her mouth, completely stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The feeling was as if the entire world had flipped upside down, and everything she thought she knew was actually just an illusion carefully maintained for years. Thomas kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, breathing calmly, as if the words he was about to say needed careful control so they wouldn't spill over more than necessary. "I always knew, Claire. Always. I just chose not to speak. I chose to keep it to myself. Because back then, I thought protecting our family was more important than any truth." The silence that followed those words was unlike any other between them. A silence that wasn't tense, nor relieving. It was emptiness filled with unanswered questions, untold stories, buried feelings that, in that exact moment, began to take shape. Claire remained motionless, as if her body had lost the ability to react. The revelation from Thomas made her heart race, not from anger, nor shame, but from something she couldn't name. It was as if, suddenly, she was standing in front of a stranger. The man with whom she shared an entire life now seemed to carry within him a version she had never imagined existed. And before she could process anything, he continued, with the same calmness that felt like a disguised punch. "At first, I thought it was just in my head. You remember that time, when I started becoming more distant, quieter? I didn't know if it was just paranoia or if something was really wrong. But then, little things started making sense. Small things. Dates that didn't match up, looks you avoided, conversations that seemed to carry more weight than you let on." He rubbed his hands against his thighs, took a deep breath, and for a brief moment, closed his eyes as if seeking strength from his own memories to continue. "The day Carla was born, Claire. I never told you this, but I looked at her in your arms and something inside me screamed. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind creating things, stress, tiredness, anything. But as she grew, it became impossible to ignore. She didn't look like me. And the more I saw her resemble someone else, the more it consumed me from the inside." Then he turned, looked directly into Claire's eyes, and the intensity of that gaze made her body tremble. "I needed to get rid of that doubt. I did a DNA test, secretly. When I got the result, it was like the ground opened up. I thought I would go crazy. For a few days, I locked myself inside. I thought about confronting you. I thought about packing my bags, disappearing, leaving your life. But after thinking for a long time, I realized that, as much as it destroyed me inside, I still loved you. And more than that, I loved our children. Including Carla. Claire, hearing this, felt a mix of relief and despair. She wanted to say something, but the words simply wouldn't come. Thomas held his chin, took another deep breath, and with a more bitter tone, finished, "But I didn't know how to deal with it the right way. The truth is, at first, I wanted to punish you. I wanted you to feel the same pain I did. I wanted you to know what it feels like to look at someone every day and see a living reminder of betrayal." He shook his head, pressing his lips together, as if fighting his own emotions. "And you know what was the first thing that came to mind? Going to Daniel. Breaking that bastard in half. Destroying his life, the way he destroyed mine. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wouldn't bring me peace. It wouldn't erase what happened. So I chose something else." Claire widened her eyes, with a tightening in her chest that felt suffocating. "I went to his wife. Linda. At first, I just wanted to talk. I wanted to understand if she knew anything, if she suspected, if she had also noticed. But things didn't go the way I imagined. Because, Claire, she was also broken. She knew. She always knew." He paused for a long time, letting silence fill the space. Claire clenched her hands, feeling her nails press into her skin. Her pain was identical to mine. And in the middle of that shared pain, we started getting closer. At first, it was just conversations. Venting. Two broken hearts trying to figure out how to move forward after being betrayed by the people they loved most. But over time, it turned into something more. Claire put her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. Part of her seemed to already know what was coming, but the shock was still devastating. "I had an affair with Linda, Claire. A long, ongoing, silent affair. And," he looked directly into her eyes, not blinking, "from that relationship, 2 children were born." Claire's body lost its strength. She had to grab the edge of the chair to avoid collapsing. She turned pale. The air seemed to vanish. Thomas didn't look away. He knew there was no going back from that point. "And before you ask, yes. Daniel thinks they're his. I let him believe that, just like you let me believe Carla was mine for so long. It was my way of giving back the same treatment. Of showing that I also knew how to be cold, calculating, and that I could smile while hiding an entire world behind my eyes." The silence that enveloped the two of them seemed to scream. Claire felt her heart racing, as if it might burst from her chest. Her mouth dried, her mind spun. She wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. All of this seemed surreal. A story that absolutely couldn't be happening to her. Thomas then looked away, took a deep breath, and in a softer tone, finished, "And as crazy as it sounds, I still loved you. Still loved our family. Still pretended everything was in order, even knowing that behind that perfect family scene, there were more lies than anyone could imagine." He then turned to look directly into Claire's eyes again, and what she saw there was something she would never forget. A mixture of bitterness, love, resentment, complicity, pain, and a strange sense of peace. As if, after so many years, that burden was finally lifting from his chest. Claire covered her face with her hands, shaking her head slowly, unable to believe that the entire life they built together was, in reality, built on secrets far deeper than she could have ever imagined. Claire pressed her fingers together, feeling her palms sweat and her chest grow heavy. She shook her head slowly, unsure whether she was trying to deny it all or searching for some kind of strength to stay conscious. For a few seconds, she stayed silent, staring into nothingness, trying to absorb every word, every detail, every revelation that seemed impossible to grasp. Up until that moment, she believed her biggest mistake was the secret she carried alone for so long, but suddenly, she discovered that Thomas had also built an entire castle of lies, carefully hidden behind the facade of the perfect husband, devoted father, and exemplary man. When she finally found the strength to lift her face and look at him, she noticed something in Thomas's eyes she had never seen before. It was a mix of exhaustion, pain, and freedom. As if he was, for the first time in decades, breathing without that crushing weight on his chest. It cut into her deeply because, deep down, she knew exactly how that felt. For a moment, she wanted to scream. Wanted to stand up, slam her hands on something, ask how he could do this, how he lived with her all those years raising children, smiling at parties, toasting birthdays, pretending to be the perfect husband while secretly sharing a parallel life with the wife of the man with whom she committed the biggest mistake of her life. She wanted to ask how he dared, how he slept peacefully, how he smiled looking into her eyes knowing everything. But at the same time, a voice inside her, the same one that held her back during difficult situations, told her that none of this would change anything. No words would undo what was done. No question would bring back time or fix what was never truly whole. She pulled in a sharp breath, pressed her hands on her knees, and said, with a trembling voice but a strange sense of dignity, "We lived a lie, the whole time." Thomas didn't respond immediately. He stared fixedly at the lake, as if that horizon was the only place strong enough to hold the weight of the thoughts flooding his mind. "I don't know if it was a lie," he replied after a few seconds. "Maybe, it was just the way we found to keep going. Each dealing with our own pain, our own mistakes, trying, I don't know, pretending it still made sense." Claire bit her lip, holding back tears threatening to fall. "And did it make sense, Thomas? Really? Because looking at it now, it seems like we got used to living surrounded by lies, betrayals, omissions, and still called it life, family." He took a deep breath, slowly shook his head, and responded with a sincerity that seemed to slice through the air. "I think it did, yes. Because despite everything, there was love. In a twisted, imperfect, cracked way, but it was there. I loved you, Claire. And I know that deep down, you loved me too. We just got lost somewhere along the way." She shut her eyes tightly, let a few tears escape, and then shook her head as if agreeing, even though she didn't want to. "We got lost a long time ago. We just didn't have the courage to admit it." Silence returned, thick, almost suffocating. Both knew there was nothing more to say that could change what was now laid bare, naked, raw, painful. The masks they held onto for an entire lifetime had finally fallen. And as devastating as that was to face, there was also a certain relief. Because now, there was no room for pretense anymore. For long minutes, they sat there quietly, staring into the void, immersed in memories that suddenly tasted bittersweet. Every birthday, every trip, every hug, every knowing glance, now came with a shadow. And yet, part of them understood that, despite everything, that also was part of the story they built together. A story that, although full of mistakes, was real in its own way. Thomas adjusted his posture on the chair, looked at Claire with slightly gentler, lighter eyes, and said with a nearly broken voice, "Claire, we deserve a fresh start." She slowly turned her face toward him, not immediately understanding what those words meant. "What kind of fresh start, Thomas? After all this, what's left of us?" He took a deep breath, let his head drop slightly forward, and answered with all the calm and certainty he could gather within himself. "What's left is respect. What's left is the fact that, despite everything, we built a life. We raised children, we overcame so much. Yes, we made mistakes. We hurt each other more than we should have, but we also had love, companionship, amazing moments. But now it's time for each of us to follow our own path. For real. Without ties, without guilt, without more lies." Claire kept looking at him, not saying anything. Inside her, a war raged. Part of her wanted to rebel, another part wanted to simply accept, because, in truth, she had carried this hidden longing for a long time, buried, suppressed, disguised by routine, obligations, fear of what others might say, and attachment to what, deep down, no longer existed. She took a deep breath, wiped her face, stood up slowly, looked at Thomas with teary eyes, and with a firm voice said, "You're right. It's time." He also stood up. For a moment, they stood face to face, looking at each other like two strangers who somehow knew everything about one another. Without needing any more words, they hugged. A long, tight hug filled with history, pain, love, and goodbyes. Things their mouths could no longer express. Thomas held her face with both hands, looked deeply into her eyes, and with a trembling voice, whispered, "Thank you, for everything." Claire gave a slight smile, holding back her tears, and replied almost in a whisper. "And you, for everything too." She picked up her bags, walked to the car, opened the door, but before getting in, turned to him one last time. Thomas stood on the porch, unmoving, staring straight at her. Claire then squinted slightly, held her breath, and let out a sentence that pierced through his chest like a perfectly aimed arrow. "Thomas. I also knew. I always knew. Since the beginning. I just never wanted to destroy what somehow worked, in our own way." He stood frozen, unsure how to react. His whole body seemed to freeze. His legs lost strength, his mouth dried, and for the first time throughout that conversation, he couldn't say a single word. Claire got into the car, started the engine, and drove off, taking with her not just her bags, but decades of history, secrets, love, pain, and everything that, in the end, shaped who they were. Thomas remained there, motionless, staring into the void. And in that moment, he realized that sometimes the greatest betrayal isn't what you do, but what you hide. And that, in the end, people don't stay together because they are perfect. They stay together because they choose to live with imperfections, until they can't anymore. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.